This video is part of our series on supply and demand. By the end of this video, you'll know the law of demand and be able to graphically and verbally describe demand functions. Demand involves a couple of parameters. One is the price. That's what the buyer has to pay for a unit of the specific good or service. The other is the quantity demanded. That's the total number of units of a good or service consumers want to purchase at a given price. Demand is the relationship between the price of a good and the quantity that someone is willing and able to buy. And the law of demand is this relationship that most goods hold, that a higher price leads to a lower quantity demanded. Lower price leads to a higher quantity demanded. As long as we hold all other variables constant, that's our ceteris paribus or ceteris paribus assumption, which, you know, if you want to speak Latin, you can speak Latin. That's fine. You do you, bud. So how do we describe demand? One way is with a demand schedule. That's a table that shows the quantity demanded for a certain good or service at a range of prices. So example here, we're going to talk about widgets. Price is measured in dollars per widget. Quantity demanded is measured in the number of widgets over some time period over some geographic area. So maybe we'll have quantity demanded number of widgets sold in New York State in a month. This demand schedule is just a table, right? It has a couple of prices, not every price. For example, we don't have any data on prices of $1 or $2 or $12.50 or $27 or anything like that, but it's got a couple of points. Hopefully this demand schedule looks a little bit familiar to you. So let's go ahead and graph it. You guys have already done this once, but probably not today. So let's go ahead and take a look here. Our first point is we move over 100 units and up 0. Then we move over 80 units and up 5. Then we move over 60 units and up 10. Then we move over 40 units and up 15. Then we move over 20 and up 20. And then over 0 and up 25. And connect those dots. It's ugly, but it does the job. So we took that demand schedule and we created a graph. So we can use this demand schedule to create a graph of demand, or what we call a demand curve. It's called a curve even though it has no curvature to it, even though it's perfectly straight, or it would be if I were a bit better artist. So here's a slightly better looking version of our curve. It's one that I prepared beforehand. The demand curve is a graphic representation of the relationship between price of a certain good and the quantity demanded of that good. Price is always going to go on the vertical axis. Quantity is always going to go on our horizontal axis. If you set these up differently, you're going to get graphs that look wrong. The demand schedule shows as the price rises, quantity demanded decreases, and vice versa. So this gives us a downward sloped demand curve. And that's the law of demand in action. So the law of demand tells us not just that there's an inverse relationship between the price of a good and the quantity demanded. It tells us that demand curves slope downward. So keep that in mind, folks, that the law of demand tells us that demand curves slope downward. And if you remember that the two D words, demand and downward, go together, you're going to be in okay shape. Now, why don't you try it? Pause the video. Consider this demand equation, Q equals 50 minus 2P. Make a demand schedule using 5 prices, graph the demand, and tell us how we know this is a demand equation. Did you try it? All right. So first of all, we know this is a demand equation, not a supply equation, because there is a negative slope. So a negative slope means that we're looking at a demand function. Okay, so let's see. Let's take our, well, we got our price here. We got our quantity here. And let's go ahead and maybe choose 0 as our first price. And 50 minus 2 times 0 is still 50. Let's make that Q look a little bit better. 5 as our second price. Q equals 50 minus 2 times 5. 50 minus 2 times 5. That's 50 minus 10 is 40. 10. 50 minus 2 times 10, that's 20, is 30. Are we seeing a pattern here? 15 gives us 20. 20 will leave us a 10. And then, just for the record, if we go to 25, we'll end up at 0. So let's go ahead and graph this. We have price on our vertical, quantity on our horizontal. Price, we're going to go 5, 10, 15, 20, and 25. And then quantity, let's go 10, 20, 30, 40, and 50. And our first ordered pair, we go over 50 and up 0. Second, we go over 40 and up 5. Third, we go over 30 and up 10. And then we can continue moving in a this-wise fashion. Go ahead and connect those dots. And there's our demand curve. So we created a demand schedule, we graphed it, and we verified that this is a demand function by looking at the negative slope. So, do you remember what demand is and what the law of demand is? Do you remember what a demand curve is? And do you remember how you can create a demand curve using a data set?